How do you thicken a sauce or thicken foods without using flour or cornstarch? It's one of the big questions when you're cooking keto. Let me show you a few tips and tricks. Okay guys, so you've got a recipe that you absolutely love or you find in a magazine or online, but it calls for flour or cornstarch as a thickener. Well, those are full of carbs and you really want to avoid those ingredients. So what can you use? There are a couple of substitute ingredients that might work depending on what you're making. There are things like xanthan gum, which serves as a thickener, but be really careful if you're using this. If you don't sprinkle it in a little at a time, it can get clumpy. But more than anything, if you use too much, xanthan gum can make sauces and casseroles a little slimy. So you want to use just a bit. You can also use a little bit in baked goods to help give it a little better texture and help it hold together. There are also things like guar gum that you can use and glucomannan. Both of those are actually a little bit better in cold applications. So if you're using something like that, again, sprinkle it in a little bit at a time. And remember that glucomannan and guar both thicken as they cool. They're great for ice creams and things like that. But if you're using them in a hot sauce, it will thicken as it cools down. So what you start with might be a perfect texture, but then by the time you finish, it might be too thick. So take care if you're using glucomannan or guar gum for that. There are also thickeners like gelatin that you can use. And then there's a sea gelatin that vegetarians or people who eat plant-based diet can use, and that's agar-agar. Again, not necessarily for cooking, but these work in cold applications. Just dissolve them in water before you add them to whatever you're making. You can also thicken recipes by cooking techniques. So for example, put something on the stovetop, let's say some heavy cream, simmer it down. It will naturally thicken as the water cooks out of it. The same thing for a tasty broth. The more you simmer it, the thicker it becomes. You can also puree some soups to get a thicker texture. Like think about a cheddar broccoli soup. You can pull out some of the broccoli cheddar, put it in the blender, and it makes a really smooth and creamy texture when you pour it back into the soup. Cauliflower tends to do the same thing. Last, there are some ingredients that you can add to recipes that will make them automatically creamy. For example, dairy products like cheese, sour cream, cream cheese, or even heavy cream will tend to thicken products up, especially if you simmer them down. Another trick that I like to use is an egg yolk. There's a recipe, Chicken a la Queen, on our website that uses an egg yolk to thicken the sauce. You can also make mayonnaise. Think about the consistency that you get when you use the yolk for that. Hollandaise is another. Or think about desserts like a custard. So an egg yolk is a great tip and it adds a little fat and protein to whatever it is you're making. For non-dairy options, you can also use some coconut cream as a thickener, or avocado. We have several recipes that use both, but there's a shrimp dish that I made with spaghetti squash that was dairy-free, and I used avocado to help make the creamy sauce. I hope that this guide for how to thicken foods or sauces without flour or cornstarch has been helpful. Check out the guide on Diet Doctor, and don't forget to check out the bechamel recipe sauce.